Chapter 8. There was no news for 2 days. As soon as Hussein discovered Iqbal's escape, he organized his friends and relatives, who climbed into their Toyota vans to search for the fugitive, swearing as they slid over the muddy roads. We waited anxiously. We watched the courtyard gate. Hussein returned with a grim face late in the afternoon, his clothes soaked and his boots all muddied. He came into the workshop where, heads down, we were all working at our looms. "From now on," he said, "you'll work an hour more a day, every day." He put bars on the little window, and Kareem had to give him back the keys. "You and I will talk about this later," he said menacingly. Kareem was terrified. Hussein went out again the next day, too, but he came back before the muezzin had called for midday prayers, and then shut himself in the house. As I worked, I thought of Iqbal. Perhaps he had reached home and was embracing his parents. But the master would certainly go there to look and would threaten Iqbal's father and mother with prison if they didn't give their son back to him. Maybe he was still hidden somewhere in the city. Where would he sleep? What would he eat? "He's smart," I repeated to myself. "He'll manage." Then I remembered his promise. "In spring, you and I will fly a kite." I wanted it to be true, but I tried not to delude myself. I spoke to little Maria as if she were able to understand and answer back and comfort me. "Do you know what a kite is, Maria? Have you ever played with one?" Naturally, she didn't answer. "It's wonderful. You run and the kite rises higher and higher in the sky. Sometimes it even touches the clouds, and it soars and veers in the wind. You have to be very careful, though. If you let go of the string, you lose the kite, and after a while it floats away. It happened to me when I was too young and inexperienced. I was really sorry, and I cried for my lost kite. But in that moment, watching it fly higher and higher until it was swallowed up by the sky, it wasn't so awful. I thought, who knows where it's going?" The morning of the third day. We had just started working at our looms when a neighbor came running in. He and the master moved outside the doorway, and the neighbor spoke very fast, gesturing with his hands. He looked scared. Hussein and the mistress came into the workshop and told us to leave everything as it was. Then they pushed us across the courtyard, crying, "Quickly, quickly!" They pulled open the rusty iron door to the tomb and made us bunch up on the steps. "Stay there," ordered Hussein. "No one dare make a sound." Someone was knocking on the big outside door. I was trapped halfway down the stairs. "What's going on?" I asked the child in front of me. "I can't see very well," someone whispered. "But the master has gone to open. There are some people. It looks like a policeman. There are 2 policemen, and Iqbal's with them." I elbowed my way up to the top step, where I put my eye to one of the rusty holes in the old door, and it was true. There were 2 policemen, fat and shiny with enormous black mustaches. They were wearing greasy, wrinkled uniforms, and their bellies hung over their belts. But they were policemen. Iqbal stood between them. Hussein acted humble, bowing his head slightly and rubbing his hands together. Next to him, the mistress twisted and tortured a corner of her apron. I saw Iqbal raise his hand and point toward the workshop. The policemen walked slowly and calmly across the courtyard, skirting the puddles. When they reached the door, they looked in, then talked to each other and asked Hussein something. Keeping his respectful attitude, he began to speak very fast, turning every now and then to ask the mistress to confirm what he was saying. "What's happening?" somebody from behind asked. "I don't know. I can't hear what they're saying," I answered. "But I think Iqbal has accused the master." "Accused him? You mean that now they'll put him in prison?" "Quiet!" Hussein became very animated, making broad gestures with his hands. The policeman looked bored. One of them took a look at an old-fashioned pocket watch. Hussein took Iqbal's hand and pulled, while Iqbal resisted, digging in his feet. Hussein gave his hair a rough caress, said something more to the policeman, handed Iqbal over to his wife, and gestured to her to take him into the house. "No!" shouted Iqbal. "No!" And then when he said something more, that was lost in a clap of thunder. "What's happening?" the children behind me were asking. "What's happening, Fatima?" "I don't understand. They're giving Iqbal back to Hussein." "You mean they're not going to arrest him?" I could see Iqbal yelling and squirming as he tried to free himself from the mistress's grip, until they disappeared into the house. It began to pour. The policemen were in a hurry. Behind me, everyone was talking, but I hardly heard them. I couldn't believe my eyes. Hussein stuck his hand into the wide band he wore around his waist and brought out a big wad of banknotes. He counted out a small pile and gave it to the first policeman. Then he counted out another small pile and gave it to the second. They both nodded, satisfied. Then they pulled at their mustaches, put the money in their pockets, and went away in the rain. Down on the steps to the tomb, we were all silent. Inside the house, Iqbal kept yelling, but it was no use. The mistress came to send us back to work. We didn't see Iqbal leave the house, but we heard all too well the bang of the grate of the tomb as it closed over him. The never-ending nightmare of our lives resumed. We did all the ordinary things, but almost without realizing it. Wake up, go to the bathroom. My little window was closed forever, but I didn't feel like jumping anymore anyhow. Eat breakfast, work, work, work until it was time to go to bed. I cried thinking of Iqbal locked down in the tomb. I'd fall into a heavy sleep, then wake up suddenly to find that nothing was changed. Rainwater was dripping through the holes in the roof. I was still a prisoner. Iqbal was still down in the tomb. And this time, we couldn't get out to help him. I was afraid he would die. Hussein Khan wasn't there. A few hours after the policeman came, he had left on a business trip. He had called Kareem in front of all of us and said, "When I get back, I'll measure everybody's work. Remember, you're the only one responsible for what they will have done." Yes, master, Kareem obeyed. "As for the one down there?" Yes. "Leave him there." Yes, master. Kareem was terrified, and he didn't give us a minute's rest, a single minute's distraction. "You want to ruin me," he repeated, "but I won't let you. Get back to work, work." I lost track of time. How many days had passed? 4, 5, 6? Iqbal was still down there. I know he'll die. At night, we stopped meeting. Nobody wanted to. What good was it? Before Iqbal's arrival, I had been resigned to my life. I couldn't even imagine a different one. Iqbal had sown the seeds of hope in all of us. Now the disappointment was too strong. He wouldn't be able to lead us anymore, and none of us had enough courage to rebel against Hussein. He'll die, I thought, and I'll be more alone than ever. Hussein Khan came back on a Friday, a holy day of rest for everyone except us. He changed his clothes, greeted the neighbors who had come over to ask how his trip and his business had gone, then briefly took a look in the workshop. He told Kareem sternly that after lunch he would be measuring the work we had done. Then he went off to eat. We weren't even allowed our usual break. "You have to get on with your work," Kareem shouted. He was all sweaty and upset. "Otherwise the master will blame me." I worked and tried not to pay attention to my hunger. The pungent aroma of spicy mutton wafted over from the master's house. I had eaten it 2 or 3 times. Back in my village, the women prepared it for special occasions, like Chodi Eid. It had to burn your tongue and throat, otherwise the men didn't appreciate it. The meat was fatty and tasty. Work! And perhaps they even had sweets, fritters with fresh, soft cheese rolled in sugar and cinnamon. Work! I was hungry. I was tired. I was desperate. The master entered, picking at his teeth with a toothpick. We stopped our work and stood beside our looms. Hussein Khan rubbed his back, took out his tape measure and a piece of paper where he had written the length of our work before he left, and very calmly began his calculations. Then he took the slate and made his decision. 3 marks gone, 4 marks gone, or no mark because the work hadn't been done well. Nobody dared complain. The master continued his counting, while Karim followed at his heels like a dog hoping for a bone. After the decision, we all bowed our heads in submission. Salman, only 1 mark erased. Ali, it's a mess. Not even 1. And little Ali could hardly hold back his tears. Mohammed, 3 marks, and he whistled with relief. Hussein was at the back of the room. Now, Maria. Hussein Khan stopped short in front of little Maria's loom, and his eyes bulged. Karim didn't understand the terrifying look he received, but he whined in terror. And what is this? Roared Hussein Khan. I don't know, master. I stammered Karim. We all went to have a look. Maria always had the easiest patterns, carpets with simple geometric figures that didn't require any particular skill. She wasn't strong and didn't even seem very smart, perhaps because of her deafness or whatever was wrong with her. Hussein Khan always said he kept her out of charity, but that wasn't true. She did her share of work. We crowded in front of her loom. She had taken advantage of the fact that nobody ever paid much attention to her and that Karim behaved as though she didn't exist. And she had changed the carpet she was working on. In the middle of the carpet, instead of a simple red and yellow stripes, there was now a picture. It was of a kite. A big white kite with long plumes tied to the tail. They seemed to be fluttering in the wind, and there was a thin string that hung from the kite and bits of white that were clouds. It was beautiful. Maria was standing next to her work, looking even smaller, more delicate and defenseless than usual. Hussein Khan's mouth was wide open. He started to speak, but couldn't. He looked at Karim. He looked at all of us. He looked in the direction of the door for support from the mistress. Now he's going to burst. He's so angry, I thought. Hussein Khan uttered the only words he knew how to say with a rallying voice. Into the tomb you go too. We gathered around him. Maria was too weak and delicate to survive even a single day in the tomb, and Hussein knew this as well as we did. Into the tomb, he repeated, but this time he didn't seem so sure of himself. A voice screamed inside my head, Do something, for the love of heaven, somebody do something. Hussein put out his hand to grab Maria. From the corner of my eye, I saw Salman push his way to the front of the group. If you send her, he said, trying to keep his voice firm, then send me too. What? What? I said punish me as well. Despite his pitted skin and his rough hands, Salman was beautiful at that moment. Well, what the hell, said Mohammed, and he immediately began to stammer from emotion. Well then, Go on, they encouraged him from the back. Send me too, he concluded. He looked around, satisfied as though he had made an important speech. He scratched his head and spat in the dirt like Karim. By then we all had our hands up and were yelling, Send me too. Even little Ali shouted from behind my skirt. Hussein Khan was pale. He moved restlessly, unable to decide what to do. He tried to shout over our voices, but couldn't. You could see that he loathed us and that he would have liked to see us dead. But even he knew that wasn't possible. And after a bit, he gave up. We couldn't believe our eyes. Muttering various threats, Hussein Khan retreated. Karim slipped away with him. Iqbal was back with us an hour later, after 6 days in the tomb. He was exhausted, pale and starving, but he was still alive.